we are going to be discussing about basic programming concepts. So the reason why we are discussing basic programming concepts is that this is one of, the prerequisites to learn integration. Because I am going to explain a little, because I know a bit that you are not really, you don't have any introduction to integration as such. We are going to proceed with a complete topic in future, but I'm just in a one single line going to explain what exactly integration is. Basically, integration is the process of connecting your two ends. So I think you might be familiar with full stack. That full stack is basically you have a front end, a middleware, and a back end. So basically, what happens is the work that is done in the front end and back end needs to be connected. So that connection between them is basically we are integrating both the ends. And our middleware is usually the integration point or the integration enabler that is helping to connect those 2 points. This is the little introduction about integration, because we are going to very fluently or very easily throw this word around. So I thought it's important to explain it to you that what integration actually means. Now, why do you need little programming knowledge? At the end of the day, we're working on a technology that might also need some sort of programming. So I'm going to give you a little heads up. We use a palette shape by the name Groovy script. So this Groovy script is basically a script that we write for our particular, requirements. And that requirements is, for example, the ones that I have used was for basically passing my XML payload to the next shape in the flow. So you need a little bit knowledge of programming, and once you're working with computer technologies or information technologies, we basically need to have a little background of programming. So, well, the first, I think you might have also learned this in 12th standard or now in your college, that the first point of any introduction to any language is the variable. So basically, variable, what I'm going to just open this question to you. What do you understand by the word variable?
Variable is sort of a container that stores some data, which uses input, which uses which a user gives to the machine, and
Okay,
it has a certain name.
okay, understood. Okay, so I think you're familiar with the variables used in maths, right?
Yeah,
Mathematics. Okay, so basically, why do we use variables in mathematics?
to like specify some numbers to the variables.
Kind of. Basically, yeah, you're right in your way, but mostly when we use a variable is when, for example, when we are talking about a triangle, those questions where we need to, find
Yeah.
the side of a triangle, we used to
Hmm.
assume that the side of a triangle is some variable A, right? So here, variable basically means that it is a value whose place or, whose particularity, whose exact value we don't know. We're assuming this for our operation to run. Similarly, in case of our computers or in case of our memory, a variable is basically a little memory container. That was absolutely correct on your part. But here, this memory container, we don't know exactly this place where this variable is present on the memory or on the hard disk. So we assign this variable a little value that, okay, my variable A is equals to 10. So now this value of 10 is stored somewhere in my memory. So we call it variable because of the fact we do not really know which exact position or which exact place that is. So the exact English, meaning of variable is something that's value is not known or something that is not known. So that is this. Now, when we talk about variables, we have two types of variables broadly. One is our local variable, one is our global variable. So I think you're familiar with local and global. Local variable is basically the variable that is introduced in the scope of our code or in the program. And a global one is that is introduced out of the scope of our program, and that can be accessed by different functions in that particular program or different block of codes that are part of that program. Now, this is basically the introduction to what variables are generally. Have a palette by the name variables, which is the exact name is right variable. So let's talk about variables in CPI. So the broad concept of variable is same. Excuse me. The broad concept of variable is same, that it is used to basically share the data. Now, in case of CPI, there we were just creating a little arbitrary letter A, and that was getting the value assigned. Here we have a particular shape through which we pass, works the same, does the same, exactly same process of it. It's just we are using a shape that is a part of our flow. So if the shape is basically the part of the flow, you declare that, you create that shape at the moment and it's part of the flow, it is our local variable. But if you create another integration flow outside that integration flow that you're working on, and then pass that variable through this integration flow, like we used to do that. For example, we write a code to add two numbers, and we declare that those two numbers A and B before the function where we give the processing of add becomes our local. Similarly, in case of CPI, we create another integration flow that passes the variable value first, and then we incorporate it into our current working flow. That is our global variable. I hope I'm making a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can see the difference between those two. Work is absolutely same. It's just this is a palette shape that we have, and these you are, familiar with what these are. Okay, one more thing. In case of RCPI, I think I'll also make myself clear ahead. We basically work or use languages like XML, JSON, CSV. So the only difference that you can find in between these two is there is not like defined data type in case of CPI variable. Of course, the value that you are passing will have those little definitions when you pass an XML value. It will also have some characters, some numbers, some alphanumerics, all of that. But in case of our programming languages, we used to basically particularly define that, okay, variable age will only store number values. Here it's a little different because we do not, deal with linear data like, okay, we are going to get numbers and numbers only or text and text only. We have a mix of it. I think this you will understand once you also go through those sessions and go through the payloads that they are passing through each shape. You'll understand what exactly is the input that we give for our flow. So are you clear with variables? Shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Anybody who would like to add something to it?
No, Kirti.
Oh. So the next thing is loop, or shall we say a little nightmare for every coder? Because these are something that we find very, how do I put it in a good way? Very irritating when they don't work.
Yeah, I get it.
So yeah, basically loop, what does loop mean in English? Basically running something in a full circle, or the start and the end point of the process is same. So usually a loop means that, but in our case, what we do use loop for is when we need to, we use loop as an iterative statement. So by iterative statement, we mean when we need to repeat something. So the loop is basically helping us to repeat something with a defined, rate of succession. So by that, what I mean is when you write a statement for your for loop, you define an initialization, you define a condition till which the loop will run, and then you define an increment state. So by that, recorded by me saying that we have a recorded increment is that we have defined that okay, it will increase by +1 or by +2. So we know that the next value will be either the next number to this, or it will be two numbers ahead of it, or vice or anything based on your condition. So basically, loop is usually generally used when we need to iterate or when we need to repeat a statement. So it works absolutely the same in case of CPI. In CPI, we do not, just like we discussed about variable, we do not have a actual shape on the lines of loop because loop is a little programming specific topic. So we use the concept of loop in Groovy script. So our Groovy script is basically our language that we are using, a shape where we write a script that we pass based on our needs and our requirements or what the flow is and how that data needs to pass through the Groovy and to the next shape. Honestly a little, I'm gonna be honest, it's a little difficult for me to explain you what a Groovy does in words because it is something very, process your condition oriented as to what your iFlow is will define what your Groovy is working on. So once you'll understand, you'll get a little bit more understanding when you go through the Groovy specific session that will happen during the course. And if you feel to, understand a little bit, please go and read the help document. Though it's a little long and sometimes it's all over the place, but once you get used to it, once you get into working to it, you'll understand all those points. Okay, so as you can see, we have three types of loops. Basically, we have three, named loops, but we have only two types of loops. One is entry control loops and one is exit control. So we have two entry control loops, that is our for loop and our while loop. And one exit control loop, that is our that is our do while loop. So the same basically works in Groovy script as well. Groovy script is nothing but if Groovy in itself is another language, but if you go through a script, you might find it a little, close to a bit of JavaScript and a bit of Java. But Groovy in itself is another language. So I'm not encouraging you to, be like, okay, I know Java, I know JavaScript, so I know Groovy. Groovy is in itself another language. But now if you go through and if you have a little bit of idea of Java, you can see that some statements over here like this static void main, these are some statements that you find a part of, Java. So you know how a for loop is defined. You have an initializing statement, then you have a condition, and then you have increment. Same with the while loop. You have an initializing statement, then you have a condition, and then you, in the loop, basically give an increment. Now for do while loop is called an exit control loop because that the first block of the loop says do this. So basically, you need to first do that portion, or like for example, in this case, as you can see the example, we output the variable, the value in variable I. So if this, for example, this value which is 0 over here, if this was 10, so in case of do while loop, in case of for and while, the loop will not run because it does not, pass the condition. So it will just pass through it. But for do while, what will happen is that first it will, show the output or print the value in variable I. So we'll first get a value 10, then that value will be incremented to 11, and then that value will be checked. So now that value does not satisfy, we come out. So in case of do while, we almost every time have one entry as an output before, if the condition does not meet, we have minimum of one entry. But in case of other loops, it does not happen, because the fact that there is one set of code or a loop of code, sorry, a piece of code, not a loop of code, a piece of code that basically has to run before the condition statement comes. So that's the reason you will get an output in case of do while loop. In case of for loop or while loop, it will either pass, move on to the next statement, or sometimes, I really don't remember this ever happening, but I think I have this, that it might also go into an infinite loop. But that usually happens is when it encounters an irrational condition of the condition statement. Now we come to a very boring, or a very complicated portion based on your interpretation, that is exception handling. I think you're aware about exception handling.
Yes, sort of.
Okay. That's enough. I really would not like you to go into details because this is something I also personally never liked when I was studying. Just a heads up. But we have to go through this because it's a very helpful mechanism when it comes to working on things that are working with a very large set of data. So basically, exception handling basically is exception handling is particularly a function, or you can say a part of oops based languages. So you can find this in Java, in C++, in Python, all of these oops based languages. So exception handling is basically the process when the system or the compiler encounters an error with the data. What it does is it throws an exception. That is, it throws a query or let's understand it in layman terms. When you are working, you find a error. What would you do? You will, project it to the group, or, mention it to us. Or if we are working together, we're sitting in a room, you will just come to us and tell us that, oh, I have gotten this error. So that is basically you're throwing an exception. Then it's up to us. So when we receive the message, or when you come to us, when we understand the message, that is us catching it. And then we work on it. So our catch point is also, okay, when we catch it, we're like, oh, you might have missed this, Satya, or oh, this is something that you have not configured. Just go and configure that. It will start working. So that once that happens, then comes the finally thing. Not really sure about it. I won't, guide you in the wrong way. But I think finally basically means where we finally, get to the solution portion of it. But do please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
Ma'am, you're
So
talking
exception.
about the. Sorry to interrupt you. You're talking about the exception
Your voice is
subprocess.
cracking.
Hello,
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
clear.
hello. Yes, ma'am. So
now
you're
it's
talking
clear.
about the exception subprocess, right?
No, I'm talking about exception handling, the one that we
Handling.
do in programming languages.
Okay.
Now we are going to, introduce him to that exception subprocess.
Okay.
So exception over here is an unwanted or an unexpected event. So for our example, it's the error or the bug that you're facing in a program. Okay. Now comes to exception subprocess. So exception subprocess basically works on the same concept of, getting an error, throwing an exception, then that gets catched and you get a solution. Similar to that is exception subprocess. Okay. So basically in CPI, we have a sub-process. So by sub-process, we mean that we have a main integration flow, and then we have a little process that is inside of that integration flow. That is exception sub-process. So usually we declare this exception sub-process. Usually it's a very best practice to do, a good practice to do when you're working with a good large set of data or a large flow where there is a good amount of chances that you might get some garbage value or might have some wrong entries. For that, the system to show an error that you are not really required to add these things to your flow or the entry that you've made as wrong, we have exception sub process. In this, we basically create a sub process that will basically link us. I think, should I really explain him what exactly success exception sub process is? My God. Or should I just leave it on this
No, ma'am, there
point
is
that,
no need
okay,
now.
theoretically, this is it?
How it works basically, Satya. For example, in the iFlow, that is the integration flow, if there is any error happen, then exception sub process will fetch those errors in the simple words. Nothing more complex about
Exactly.
it.
Okay.
So let's see. So exception handling you might be aware of. This is, depicted in a diagrammatic form. This is an exception sub process. So as you can see, the error starts. So this point will basically get the error value. It will pass it through if you have any shape over here, the way how you will, basically when we use exception sub process, we have a process call, and through that process call, we call in local integration process. And that local integration process is the one that usually has the solution or the point, sorry, not the solution, the point like Sahil said, that, okay, if you are working, the best example is you need to tell your client that the payload you have given us has some bugs or some errors. So what we are going to do is when this exception sub process runs, we are going to send an email where it is, given that, okay, XYZ is your error. Please look into it. So they have the information as to what the error is coming. I'm clear. Do you have any queries about this?
No, not yet.
Okay. So functions. Well, we know about functions. Functions are basically a snippet of code that we use that is designed for a specific purpose or that is designed to perform a specific task in a long chain of code. It's absolutely the same that is in normal programming languages in CPI, because functions is basically you. Again, we do not have a particular shape for functions. It is a component or you can say a tool that is used in Groovy script with the same purpose that we create a function in programming language to, have a block of code that works, or as a snippet of a large piece of code that you need to work. In Groovy, we have a little, advantage that if we have multiple functions and at the moment we need to pass function A of the 5 functions that we have, A, B, C, D, and E, we will just mention function A and then that function will run in that particular flow. You'll understand when you see this. So you can see there's no such difference in functions. Like here, you can say a function to add. So you are defining, you are getting two variables, you're declaring two variables, and then you're returning the process of those variables. Now, when you call that function, you pass those two values and you get the result. Now, basically comes the recommended languages. Well, we can pass them as languages as well, but some of these are also data format that I'll be explaining you in a bit. Basically, we mostly use XML. XML is the most frequently used language for us because XML is very easy, and at the same time we have different converters in XML. So there is one shape or a group of shapes that is called converters, which I'll be, explaining you, or you will be getting to see further in the processes. But XML is a language that we frequently use because XML is a very simple language for the system to understand, whereas JSON is the default language because JSON, mostly what we'll be using a lot of Postman. So our Postman is an API testing tool. So usually APIs are mentioned in JSON format. And what these exactly languages are, I'm going to explain you further in the next half. But these are the few languages that you will be interchangeably working on. So I hope everything is clear to you.
Yeah.
No queries?
No, not related.
Okay.